Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are live in Lagos. I'm Olayinka Oyetunji, and with me in the studio is Adenike Adeyemi. Adenike Adeyemi is the chair of the technical subcommittee of the Nigeria Economic Summit. Good afternoon, Adenike. How are you today?
Hi, Olayinka. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am doing very well. And yourself?
I am well, thank you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. The reason why we have this session is to discuss the road to NES 28. And I'm going to be asking you a few questions about the NES 28 and what we should expect after NES 28. For those that don't know what NES 28 means, it is Nigeria Economic Summit number 28. But before I go into the questions, I would just like to talk about what the Nigeria Economic Summit number 28 is. The 20th Nigeria Economic Summit will convene national and global leaders in government, business, politics, development, civil society, and academia through a hybrid summit platform, which means as participants, you can either be there physically in Abuja or you join virtually. And the theme is 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. The event starts on Monday and Tuesday, the 14th and 15th of November 2022. And we are inviting everybody to please register if you haven't registered, because it promises to be very enlightening. And, given the landscape that we have currently in Nigeria, this is, a very important summit at this time. Now, Adenike, I have a few questions for you, that covers the sessions that we're going to be having in the Nigerian Economic Summit across different pillars. Could you just say something about the National Economic Summit and why it's important?
Thank you very much, Olayinka, and really great to be here to speak about the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. One of the things we've done over the last 8 months, I would say, as the technical subcommittee, is working through what should be the priority conversation points for Nigeria at this particular time that we're in, and with a visioning for the future. As you have said, the theme for this year is 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. Our main objectives for this summit is to, first of all, as with all the other previous 28 summits that has been held, set an economic policy agenda that will focus on looking at how do we accelerate growth that is based on the foundation of sustainable and inclusive development. That's number one. Number two, again, not just setting the agenda, but also saying what then needs to be done. So part of the conversations will be deliberating on a framework and implementation plan that helps us to look at the leadership that can help to deliver the Nigeria that we want. Number three, which you would also see coming through and across the conversations that we'll be having next week, Monday and Tuesday, will be speaking on how we can build the consensus, across private sector, public sector, development sector, and all civil society and all those who are present virtually and in person on the priorities that are required for us to transform and take advantages of our immense human capital potential. Again, looking at critical success factors to ensure that happens. And at the end of the day, also making sure that we have a citizen-centered approach that looks bottom up, because oftentimes we tend to look at things from the federal perspective and from the center, but also understanding the importance of economic growth and leadership, not just at the federal level, but also at the subnational level. So looking at state and also local levels, looking at, what should be the approaches to subnational competitiveness in a way that contributes to overall economic growth and development, and come out at the end of the summit with clear consensus on what the priorities are, what should be done by whom, by when, all of which then continue which are then continued to take forward by the NESG through the various structures of the Policy Commission, the Community of Practice, and all the other stakeholder groups that work through the NESG structure. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Adenike, for providing that context. And because it's an economic summit, I mean, the focus is basically is on Nigeria's economy. And we all agree that Nigeria's economy, is in needs some attention at this time. So if you look at Nigeria's forecasted growth rate is bordering around a 2.7%, and is sitting amongst the top bottom of some 10 African countries. All right, compared to, if you look at Nigeria compared to peer countries, the growth rate is pretty small. And this reinforces the findings of the 2019 Global Competitiveness Index 4.0, covering 141 economies, which measures national competitiveness. So if you look at Nigeria in terms of set of institutions, policies, factors that determine level of productivity, Nigeria, is ranking 116 out of 129, comparable countries. So the question then is, how can Nigeria improve on these economic ratings, and what role will NES 28 play in proposing solutions?
Thank you, Olayinka. And you've put in a lot of very concerning data. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that, because sometimes people get lost in the technicalities of economic conversations and verbose. And one of the things that is very important for us is making sure that, in simple English, what are the things that we're saying as an individual, yourself, myself. We can see that, we're living in times where there's significant challenges on individuals, on businesses, in terms of inflation rates, everything, most things, particularly if you look around food, the prices have increased. Things are becoming harder. There are challenges around our human capital deficit. There are challenges around security. So the way the summit is structured is to address what we see as six challenges that are causing economic dysfunction. Because again, it's all about the economy, right? And when you have macroeconomic instability, you then see it evidence in things like you've talked about in terms of non-inclusive growth. So we have sectors that are supposed to be productive sectors, growth drivers, socio-economic engines, where and even sectors that also are able to position us where we should be, not just even regionally, but also globally. They're being challenged. So if you look at agriculture, manufacturing, construction, and trade. The second thing that we're seeing is from a macroeconomic instability perspective, where we're saying that these conversations that we're having then need to look at monetary and fiscal policies, for instance, looking at how do we address what is the strategy in the mid to long term with respect to our inflation, with respect to the volatility of our exchange rates, with respect to our significantly dwindling and almost significantly dwindling external reserves. Our public debts are significantly rising. We have a negative balance of trade. And just saying that we need a monetary policy that also aligns with what we're seeing around interest, and also helps to improve the investment climate and incentivize investment, local investment and foreign investment. You've talked also a lot around a number of areas, but when there are problems, it's usually then the financing, that then addresses it. And part of the challenges we're then saying is also to address things, particularly from a socioeconomic perspective. We then also need to have the financing that would fund those initiatives that will fund the desired growth. We have a high youth population. Unlike some other countries in the world, we have a potential for our youth population. But part of the conversations is then saying that we need to have a focus around addressing the human capital deficit that we're seeing, and the low skills gaps that we're seeing that is giving us poor human capital development index. And then there's the very obvious one, directly and indirectly, around insecurity. Investments locally, internationally will not happen. I support in the work that I do on a day-to-day businesses, small and growing businesses across Nigeria. When people are worried about the security of their lives and their livelihoods, then you don't get the potential. One is not able to reap the potential of socioeconomic growth. So even the urgent matters around insecurity, which may not be immediate national economic matters, those then are also things that need to be addressed. And then last but not the least is the challenge around improving our competitiveness, increasing our competitiveness ranking, making sure that, you know, the potential of Nigeria is able to be harnessed through that. So with all those challenges that are the priority challenges that frame the conversations of the summit, the sub themes that we've set up then address those things. So we have conversations that are focused on the first sub theme, which is on delivering macroeconomic stability for shared prosperity. We have one that addresses what we've talked about, the skills, the potential for our future, young people, children, now and in the future. So the sub-theme on that is looking at investing in our future. We have a third theme for this year, which sub-theme rather for this year, which was the priority, because to all intents and purposes, we do have a lot of national development plans, national country strategies that are there, whether it's in terms of even the recent National Economic Development Plan that was launched, or even much more sectoral strategies that are spread across the priority sectors. So part of the problem we have is not that we've not to a large extent articulated what needs to be done. Even if it's not perfect, it's also doing, it's also implementing. And so the third sub-thing we'll be looking at is how do we then unlock the binding constraints to execution? Why can we not implement? What is the challenge around that? The last but not the least sub-theme is the timely thing when a pre-election year. That also means that, as you can see, even with America just went through their midterms. We're entering a full election season next year across state, local, and national levels, and across the different arms of government. And so, what are we saying? We're saying that we need to also recognize and talk about the importance of having the leadership, the transformational leadership that helps us to drive the growth that leads, and not just leadership just at the top or at the executive level, but across board. So part of the conversations we'll be having this year will focus on the sub-theme of how do we reframe the agenda for transformative leadership. So these sub-themes would look at then addressing these conversations and the challenges that I earlier on outlined, with the focus on then agreeing on the consensus and the key focal areas for the conversations. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much, Adenike. I mean, on breaking it down, all right. I mean, what we mean about the indices that we are seeing in Nigeria that are not, that is making more people, fall below the poverty line. But you mentioned something about security, which is also a concern for many Nigerians, But the question then is, are we focusing only on physical security, or are we going to be looking at security in a more comprehensive view? What do I mean? Nigeria, because of the flood, there's food insecurity, there's social insecurity. There are so many levels of insecurity beyond the physical. But it appears that when we talk about security, we're only focusing on the physical insecurity that we have, the kidnapping, the kidnapping and all of that. Is there any session that is going to focus on these other levels of insecurity that Nigerians are experiencing every day?
Thank you, Olayinka. So yes, we are having conversations on insecurity and the dimensions on insecurity. But the good thing is that the conversations we're having around security follows on from the summit from last year. And maybe before we end, we'll talk about the summit process and then what happens after. Last year, the summit focused on the theme, NES 27 focused on the theme, securing our future, the fierce urgency of now. And one of the things that we discussed very clearly across different sessions was that security has different dimensions. In fact, there's a UNDP dimension of security and insecurity. And if you remember, I said something about security of lives and livelihood. So oftentimes security is around political security, income and economic security, particularly for vulnerable groups, women, children. security of being able to get the necessary things to be able to have a healthy and educated life. So just the opportunities for economic growth and potential. And so if you're challenged by insecurity that does not allow you have a good education to the extent that is made available, or security that then also portends harm to you from a health or physical or mental state, that's also insecurity. And then there's also the impact, on investment climate and overall. So the conversations from last year dealt with those different dimensions of security beyond just what we see in terms of physical security across the board, because they have impact across the board. They have impact on specific vulnerable segments. They have impact on economic productivity and growth. They have impact on social indices and human capital development. They have impact on being able to even harness the potential of young people and the like. So those are we look at security across the different dimensions because everything we're talking about is also impinged on that. And now more than ever, we're even having then to understand that when we continue on a negative trend of socioeconomic indicators that is then now further exacerbated by insecurity, we will continue to impede on, the potential that we have as a country at the national level, or what even the potentials that our subnationals also have.
Thank you very much, Adenike. So I'm already anticipating being at the summit. I mean,
You should.
given this, given all of this information that you are sharing, so it appears that a lot of conversations will go on to actually address what an everyday Nigerian is facing. And I believe that our audience too are also, making plans to be at the summit, either physically or virtually. I like what you said about the demography of Nigeria. Nigeria has a young, vibrant, youthful population. In fact, statistics shows that over 70% of Nigerians are probably below 30 years. And unfortunately, with this good opportunity that we have with the people, the demography, we also have the highest out of school children as a country in the world. We also have the lowest literacy rate of 62% when compared to an average developed economy that has a 99%. So the question is, what can we do? How can we as a country finance our human capital development? Because the truth is, if you are not investing in this use, if you are not investing in these people, then they might eventually become liabilities rather than assets. So what can be done, and what should we expect that the summit would address in this regard?
Thank you, Olayinka. So the thing about our demographic potential is that, you can either see it as a dividend, right? Or something that is then detrimental to it. And like you said, the approach, regardless, when you then take those perspectives, how you look at it then determines the effort that you then put to it. So on the one hand, you've talked about all these statistics that are quite worrisome and are very alarming. And then in addition to some of the recent things we've seen, so for instance, the recent strike, there's been quite a lot of concerns around migration of our very high potential talent to other economies who are attracting them in different ways. And then so many other things about the quality of our educational system, and maybe even the other infrastructural layers that then underpin it. But that's on one hand. On the other hand, one sees the potential. The potential first in terms of young people being agile, being the ones that really can help to grow a country and impact their development. For instance, most of the entrepreneurs in Nigeria now are most of the businesses in Nigeria are owned and run by young people. Young people create most of the jobs that we have in Nigeria. We see a lot of Nigerians across the world, from sports, from academia, medicine, arts, literature, every field you can imagine, you will find a Nigerian either being at the top or being very, very close to the top. So the future, our future, the potential for our future is not in doubt. What is then
Right.
required is how do we strategically invest in them? And investment is not just from a financial perspective, it's a holistic approach to say what is required from a fiscal perspective. So even what we've talked about in terms of making sure that people feel that they can dream. This is the Nigeria of our dreams. So we have a plenary or two plenaries, the opening plenary and the closing plenary, that speak to the Nigeria we want, the Nigeria of our dreams, and how to implement it. Because at the end of the day, if our young people do not feel that this is a country that they can stay in and live to the fullest of their potential, there is nothing that we do that would attract them. So how do we even envision and sell this Nigeria of our dream? Not selling an empty thing, but it's that. So we have two plenary conversations that are focused on that. And then there's also the investment that looks at financial investment and support, digital investment and support, technology and innovation infrastructure. One of the opportunities we're seeing now is that even when people are limited by the education system, as you know, as we can see sometimes in Nigeria, with technology, they are able to learn. They're able to expand their mind, expand their thinking. Barriers, geographical barriers or physical barriers become broken, right? Because they can learn regardless of where they are, and they can earn income, they can grow regardless of that. What that then means is that, you know, when we invest in the digital and technological transformation that is required, we then also increase and enhance the potential of our future. And we also have quite a number of sessions that are then focused on looking at things around upskilling. So we're having conversations that look at, first of all, even from the basic level of education, let's deal with the foundation. We have a session, a workshop session on eradicating learning poverty. That's number one. Number two, we also have two sessions that then focus on digital economy and transformation, and then saying how do we, you know, harness all the policies we've had that has been implemented to improve digitization and information and communication technology growth and development, and provide digital access, reduce digital inequity, provide digital literacy skills, and really just let digital support be that foundation that enables and enhances that. We also have sessions rather that then deal with, you know, how do we then finance this development? So we know what we should do we can do in education, primary, secondary, post-secondary, and tertiary. How do we finance that? What is required? What are the different strategies from public sector, private sector financing to also invest in? Because when you're doing those kind of investments, they're not short-term investment. There's a very long-term investment view and approach to it. So we have a design session actually, that also will deal with that. And then the last one, which sort of circles back to the first point, is a plenary, one of our plenaries that focuses on how do we envision Nigeria's future workforce, because you have to design the skills, right, for the country we want. You have to say, where do we want to be where should we be now? Where do we want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And so what kind of sectors, what is the type of growth? And then what is the type of skills that you require? What is the kind of capabilities that you require? When that is very clear, then you then say, does the education sector fit into that? Do our curriculum and the people delivering the curriculum design and implement in whatever pedagogy the kind of curriculum that allows us to develop, train, enable mentally, and and in all competency areas, the type of educational infrastructure and institutions that will churn out the students. When I say graduates, not just at the tertiary level, but across the board, that we then need to then meet that required future workforce that we have. So we also have a major plenary session that's focused on that. So we do have a lot of sessions that are focused not on really not just the type of talent and future workforce and potential and the investments that are required in the young people in our youth population, but also then saying what is the investment that is required in the different types of investment areas. How do we get that? How do we bring that back into the country? How do we create the space for that? And then who leads that? How will we measure that when we look back again in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5+ years from now?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adenike. That was quite comprehensive. I like what you said about entrepreneurship and how our young people, young Nigerians like you, like I, are the ones driving, the bedrock of the economy. Because for an economic like Nigeria, the most of the activities you will find with among the medium and small scale enterprises. But if you talk to an average businessman in Nigeria, they will tell you that doing business in Nigeria is very tough. And I like what you said about digital infrastructure technology. But what about physical infrastructure? All right. Debt of power, debt of concentration on road as a means of transportation. What do you think should be done by the government to galvanize the public sector to participate in, developing the physical infrastructure? Because that's also ties to our competitiveness. Because if you don't have the right amenities, the right infrastructure, you definitely won't be able to compete, with other peer countries. So, is there any session that's going to be addressing this? Probably like a workshop that asks the private sector what kind of enablement they would need, to make sure that they are partnering with the government to address this infrastructure deficit that the government alone would not be able to provide.
Yeah. Thank you, Olayinka. The government cannot and should not be the one that is responsible for the investments that's required. What is required from the government is to be able to create an enabling environment that allows free market flow, right? That allows people to be able to come in, whether small and growing business entrepreneurs, whether like the innovative startups that we're seeing, so that the market then is the one that then drives and accelerates that. And so the conversations, there are about 2 or 3 different questions that you asked, and I'll answer them at one. First is to say that a number of the conversations we're having at this summit this year are continuing conversations that build on the work that the NESG does at the levels of the policy commissions. So the way the policy commission works, just on a high level, is bringing together people from within a particular or joint sectors with the public sector and the private sector to working together to agree on what are the policy priorities that need to be developed, reviewed, or enabled by legislation, for instance, and then agree on that. So in a number of the conversations that we're having at the summit, it's continuing conversations from active policy work that has been done, because it's very important to emphasize that a lot a lot has happened. Sometimes some things require maybe legislative backing. And I'll give an example of things like the startup bill. Do you understand? Where we're saying that we want to encourage the investment of we want to encourage not just even young people, locally, even globally, we want to create a field where people who have high potential ideas, high growth potential businesses are able to come and effectively play without being stifled from a regulatory perspective, but also be able to build their businesses where they can get funding locally and internationally from. Part of what the Nigerian Economic Summit Group has is the NASBA, which is a joint partnership between the National Assembly and also the Nigerian Economic Summit Group from that private sector coalition perspective to say, what are the key policies we have, for instance, around doing business in Nigeria? How do we prioritize these policies? And then how do we also ensure that there's a handshake with the National Assembly to ensure that the right bills also get the thoroughness that it deserves, but that the legislative process does not also delay, the potential impact of a bill that will then enable that, right? So that's number two. Number three is then back to the conversation that we're having, is also then to say that there are a lot of policies already are in place to ensure and promote investments locally and internationally. So how do we also ensure that people are aware of the different opportunities that they have to come and invest and grow in Nigeria, but also that those investment promotion incentives are also being implemented and are implementable. So again, like I said, there are continuing conversations that go on to the summit and even continue on after the summit, but those conversations are then centered on that. With respect to the design of this summit, there are about five types of conversation types that we will have. So we have the plenaries and the interactive panel sessions that we then will deal on specific topics. But I want to draw our attention to the design workshops, the industry meetings, and the roundtables that are the ones where they're very hands-on sessions, where we have the key players within the specific industry. So for instance, we have a number of industry meetings that are going to happen during breakfast and during dinner times that are focused on the agri sector, focused on aviation, focused on financial markets, focused on information and communication technology. You can agree with me that those are what some of our priority growth sectors in the Nigerian economy, but they also require that the key stakeholders across private and public sector are there to then say, what are the progress we've made from a policy perspective, and then how do we prioritize the implementation from that. We also then have CEO roundtables that are also going to happen, and one of our CEO roundtables is focused on digital transformation with the intent of finalizing or coming out with a CEO compact on looking at the policies and the that have gone through in the last 1 to 2 years to help with digital transformation, and then now say, okay, where is this private sector role in this, and how does the private sector then build on that and then take it forward?
Thank you very much, Adenike. I'm happy, to hear that we have, focus sessions on priority sectors. But if I may ask, do we have anything on healthcare?
Yes, we have on healthcare.
Okay.
Yes, we do have on
Okay.
healthcare, because
Okay.
investing in our future is looking at the lens of education and also on health.
Okay.
As you and I, and as with a lot of citizens, a country that is also able to take care of their population and provide basic healthcare services is also important. So we are having a session which is focused on universal coverage and basic healthcare funds.
Fantastic.
Not because, again, going back to the question you had around financing, is to say, okay, there's a certain level of private and public health, particularly even public and development health financing that has gone into place. Is it being passed on across board? What is there an efficiency in the mechanism for the management and the delivery of the funds? What are the existing structures that are being put in place? And how do we ensure, how do we even bring in like maybe additional private sector involvement as required? And how do we then ensure the efficiency of these funds in a very transparent way? So yes, we do have at least one session on that. That's number one. On the other design workshop session that also focuses on financing Nigeria's human capital development, the two sectors we're focusing on are education and health. And I know I've spoken a bit on education, but the health design, the health part of that discussion, again, as our design sessions are, they're very interactive, bringing together key people there. We would look at healthcare financing also, because as you can imagine, the pandemic has taught us the importance of public health. The pandemic has taught us that if we don't look at our health systems across the primary to the tertiary levels, our economy can shut down. And given the kind of population we have, and even looking at even our spread and density across different levels of the society, now more than ever, people understand the importance of health, physical health, mental health, and just even prioritizing that. But we're also even seeing, I'm sure even from the work you do, you can see that there's increased private sector investment also in healthcare, because there's also business in the health space. So not just even looking at it from a social perspective, but also from an economic perspective. So a second leg of our Financing Nigeria's human capital development would also look at health.
Thank you very much. I'm sure every Nigerian will be, will place attention and importance on having a patient-centered healthcare system that is accessible to all and that is very efficient. So that would be a very good session to have. Now, let me ask you, a big elephant in the room is corruption. The government tries as much as possible to fight corruption. But the question then is, what should we expect from the summit on this subject, on corruption? What kind of behavioral insights would be shared at the summit to counter corruption in Nigeria, which is also eating deep into our resources?
Okay. So there's one of the units for the NESG called the PIU, and the idea behind that is to look at how just even first of all user sent putting data as a point to understand human behaviors, because when you talk about corruption, it means different people, it means different things to different people. But as with a lot of other behaviors, um, or if you don't understand how and what drives people to do things in the ways that they do it, or the environments that enable those type of behaviors, you may be trying to solve a problem without fully understanding the different expressions, right, of the problem. So one of our sessions is going to focus on harnessing behavioral insights to counter corruption. And the idea behind that session really is to provide a lens view. Again, because data is primarily at the center of what drives NESG's work and their policy recommendation. As one is looking at increasing the attention on anti-corruption across the board, one then also has to say that how do we provide a framework for people to understand what leads to corruption? What are the different elements or expressions of corruption? And how does the private sector work together with the public sector on this, but also understanding, their different roles, because there's corruption in the public sector and government, which everybody always looks at, but there's also corruption in different elements with the private sector. In fact, corruption from both sides enable the others. There is a Nigerian National Anti-Corruption Strategies 2017 to 2021. And one of the major recommendations around it was, how do you increase public engagement to reduce corruption? Because sometimes when you look at the spectrums end to end, sometimes people don't even realize, what they're doing is what will be defined as corruption. So shedding more light on the conversations around corruption, so that people then know what it is and what it is not, and the different elements of it, but also enabling and engaging public and private sector dialogue to ensure that there's openness, there's transparency, there's accountability across on the different elements of it. With then saying what needs to be done, how, by who, by when. That's what that interactive panel will deliberate on and expand on.
Thank you very much, Adenike. Now, I know that at the end of each summit, we always present a green book, recommending to the government the things that need to be done based on all the conversations, the panel sessions, the engagement, the breakfast, the dinner meetings that have happened. My question is, how do you ensure, as the summit, how does the summit ensure that these recommendations are implemented?
Thank you. So I won't say you. I won't. When I say how do you, I'll say how does the NESG, and we are all in
Yes,
different
yes,
places,
that's
part
what
of
I
the
mean. How does
NESG.
the summit
The
ensure
NESG,
the
fantastic.
yeah?
So the summit itself helps to set the economic agenda and the priorities for the next year. And so what happened in 27, that the 27th summit, as with previous summit, helped to frame the conversations that then are then taken into the different structures of the summit. Like I said, the policy commissions, roundtables, communities of practice. And this year would not be different. The only thing is that there's even a much more cogent urgency around the fragilities that we see, the instability that we see, security, and so many things. And so a few things to emphasize. At the end of this summit, we will have a consensus around the key matters and the areas that we've discussed. Very clear, and a consensus that also understands that there are people who are at the summit that are not economists. We laughed just before we started this around making sure that, regular individuals are able to take off the conversations and apply it to what they do. But more important, clarity in terms of the priority areas that need attention, what needs to be done, and what would success look like at the end of the day. You mentioned the Green Book. The Green Book is then the detailed report around the summit, which is taken on year. It's important for me to note that this summit is done in partnership um, with the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, and who has worked and continues to work collaboratively with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group in also ensuring that they also receive the comments and the feedback through the conversations that happen over a 2 to 3 day period at the summit, and apply that into the national development plans that are done. In the last few years in particular, the NESG, the summits have been very intentional around also bringing in a subnational perspective to it. And even this year, we'll have those conversations. So even state governments, subnational levels, how do these recommendations also apply at state levels and even at local levels too? So that too also happens in different structures that the summit has. So it is a continued conversation that will be applied in the different structures that the NESG works with.
Thank you very much, Adenike. So after NES 28, what next? What should we look forward to?
What I want to say is I want to recommend strongly for those who are not already involved and engaged with the summit and with the NESG to be involved at the different things that they do. I'll give an example. I am part of the community of practice for micro, small, and medium enterprises under the NESG. And what that community of practice helps with is that it brings other people, not just with us at Faith Foundation, but every other person, or as many people as are willing to be part of the community of practice who support small and growing businesses in different ways, whether through training, whether through financing or capital provision, whether through research and development, whether through looking at regulatory barriers for enabling the environment and all the side. And so we can come together as one to discuss, to engage, to share, and then also advocate as one on policies. So my challenge, honestly, my answer to your question will be a challenge because, to be honest, we are not enough. And I will say that across all the different structures that we have, because it is at those levels that we are then able to enforce policies, whether reviews, new policies designed, or ensure implementation at that level. We take everything that is discussed and agreed at the summit level and then cascade it down to ensure that they are reviewed, they're looked at by those within the space who work on that, and then those who are supposed to be the ones responsible for implementing it also get the entire view. Is there additional insight that needs to be done? Is there additional research that needs to be done? Are there additional stakeholder inputs that needs to be done? So that there's also an aggregation of perspectives and then prioritizing, what are the most important steps to happen? When do they need to happen? Where, by who, by how? So yes, that's what happens at the end of the summit.
Thank you very much, Adenike. That's very detailed. I would encourage our audience to please plan to attend the summit happening on Monday and Tuesday of this month, next week, Monday and Tuesday, November 14 and 15. Like I said earlier, you can either join virtually or find yourself in Abuja because the conference is going to hold in Abuja. And the link to register is currently being scrolled on your screen. Please take it and ensure that you attend. Adenike, do you have any closing remarks before we
And
end
my
this?
Thank you. My closing remarks is really for everybody to engage, to be engaged in the summit conversations. Like you said, it's going to happen in person and hybrid. And I also know that even across different social media platforms, we'll also be able to follow up and follow through with it. The idea is that, 2023 and beyond, we're really at a cliff time. Personally, that's how I feel. And we need to get it right. But to be able to get it right, we need to, come together and say, what do we need? What needs to be? What do we need to get right? What is the Nigeria of our dreams? What's the Nigeria we want? How do we get it? As an individual and as somebody who strongly believes in Nigeria, I want a country that I can feel that to the fullest of extent that I give myself, the country provides the potential that allows me and any other person, my children, family, everybody that is coming up, to be able to achieve the fullest of their potential. And it is conversations like the summit that enable that to happen. So we welcome everyone, private sector. I mean, I'm a civil society person, private sector, civil society, nonprofit, Nigerians in the diaspora, professionals, particularly young professionals. Please come, add your voice, get insights, share, challenge, give feedback, share even with us things that, in respect to certain conversations that we'll have, I even working, in somewhere else that, you may want to shed light on. Well, please join us and be engaged in conversations at the summit. Thank you very much, Olayinka.
Thank you very much, Adenike. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We believe that you are going to engage. We believe that together we're going to design the Nigeria of our dreams. And the theme for this summit is 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. Thank you very much, everyone. See you at the summit on Monday and Tuesday. Thank you.
Use shortcuts to get around the app, reserve your virtual seats, and attend all the summit sessions. Network with key attendees with the chat and meeting schedule functions, resources, read the event brochure, and other key documents. Virtual exhibition. Visit the virtual booth of the key event sponsors to learn about key innovative products. Did you miss a session? Then use the Watch Again feature. Need help? Then click to read the FAQs and chat with a 24/7 support center. Enjoy the summit. Have you downloaded the NES virtual app? With this app, you can enjoy all the goodness on offer.
First, it was a dream. Then it became a vision. Now it is a goal. What is our target for Nigeria by 2030? Our dear country should be sustainable, steered by leaders who say no to poverty. Have zero tolerance for hunger, prioritize good health and well-being with buoyant citizens who enjoy quality education, and promote gender equality. Let's score this goal together and leave no one behind.
This is not a political advert. It's a message to stimulate the innovative and productive transformation of Nigeria's greatest asset, the people, to create a future of shared prosperity. 2023 and beyond, how do we deliver macroeconomic stability and invest in our future? Based on our past experiences, how do we unlock the binding constraints to execution while reframing the agenda for transformational leadership? Be one of the key global stakeholders answering these pertinent questions at the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit on the 14th and 15th of November 2022 at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel, Abuja. Theme: 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. Register to attend virtually or in person at www.nesgroup.org/28. This is not a political advert. It's a message to stimulate the innovative and productive transformation of Nigeria's greatest asset, the people, to create a future of shared prosperity. 2023 and beyond, how do we deliver macroeconomic stability and invest in our future? Based on our past experiences, how do we unlock the binding constraints to execution while reframing the agenda for transformational leadership? Be one of the key global stakeholders answering these pertinent questions at the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit on the 14th and 15th of November 2022 at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel, Abuja. Theme: 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. Register to attend virtually or in person at www.nesgroup.org/28.